Hello, listeners. Welcome to my podcast, Movies Unknown. I'm your host, Calvin Hurd, and today we have a very impressive guest, the professor of film studies from Copenhagen University, Anders Bretson. He has recently published a book, Swedish-Danish Collaboration and Rivalry in Film, which has made some groundbreaking analyses into the film culture and relations of the two nations. Before we begin the discussion, I'd like to remind everyone of this podcast, listening to this podcast, and feel free to subscribe if you want to hear more. I'll be honest, I was very skeptical of the concept of Dogma 95. From what I've been reading about, I've seen the host and I respect the director, but I've seen a few reviews, including this one where they say, make an NC-17 movie with no sex or violence, hire a blind DP, make a soundtrack with such atrocious music that no record company would ever release it. And you're here to convince me of the merits of it. So tell us a bit about the core tenets of Dogma 95.
Okay. So Dogma 95 was a Danish cinematic movement in the mid-1990s seeking to radically re-examine production techniques, as well as to articulate a more conceptual critique of the commercialization of the filmmaking process, loosely based off the French New Wave themes of the 50s and 60s. Its chief architects were Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg, who confessed that their manifesto, called the Vow of Chastity, had been written in 25 minutes and under continuous bursts of merry laughter. This didn't exactly help dismiss the general skepticism that Dogma was a complete farce, and nothing short of primitive absurdism. The vow itself was based off a series of technical demands, such as limiting cranes, tripods, lights, dollies, filters, or optical effects, prohibiting props, and ensuring that all music is recorded then and there. Neither black and white nor widescreen shots were permitted, and interestingly enough, the director couldn't receive formal credit.
Okay, alright. So, is there any reason for these things, or is it just for show? Are they just trying to, flex their...
Fair question. There was, in fact, a more profound artistic vision behind the movement, and it served as a valid counterpoint to the general consensus around how films should be made. Dogma's founding fathers, much like the New Wave directors, railed against the cosmeticization of movies and their predictable dramaturgy.
So what exactly do you mean by the cosmeticization of movies and their predictable dramaturgy?
Good question. Well, cosmeticization, if I'm able to pronounce it, refers to the glossy surfaces that comprise most films, washing out the last grains of truth. As opposed to elevating our access to the story, place, and characters, technology then becomes a filter that distorts the essence of what a director should be conveying and distracts the viewer from the morals and realities that should be the artistic focus. Predictable dramaturgy, on the other hand, refers to what Trier and Rittenberg dislike about the homogenization of narrative structures, as well as the proliferation of TV and how it conditions us to passively absorb an excess of information. The two of them sought to gut the conventional filmmaking methods in the hopes that they would bring us closer to a more pure creative form. According to Vinterberg, at least, films get done in a particular way. You have a unit of, say, 30 people, lots of lighting, all planned ages in advance. It's a long, ponderous machine. We can conclude from this that by rethinking the way we shoot films, we alter the end product, thereby completely expanding its possibilities and transcending its limitations.
So I'm a bit unclear what you mean by that. Do you mean in the sense that they take away the flashiness of movies, where they less bright lights, lots of loud music, that sort of stuff?
To a degree, but I would say it's more focused on restricting the creative process to a particular time and place, that being on set. So limiting the preparation and creating the opportunity for spontaneous, extemporaneous moments of ingenuity to arise, I'd say.
Okay. I get what you mean now. So what was the status quo that they were trying to reject, not with Dogma 95?
Yes, also very topical. By the beginning of the 20th century, film production and execution adopted what was called an economic model. And much like a manufacturing business, it sought to specialize and reduce the whole to various constituent parts in order to maximize efficiency and precision. People like the prolific American producer Thomas Harper Ince set out to rationalize less methodical filmmaking habits. He also tried to universalize different roles so that any new recruit could quickly perform the necessary tasks. In other words, the goal was to strip the process of any dependency on a few individuals, like an auteur-style director, on whose expertise and vision the film's functioning relied immensely.
Okay. So how did this exactly work in practice then?
All right. Well, the second aspect of this attempt at streamlining was the detailed planning of all filming nuances before heading to set. Scripts would include descriptions of each shot and its adjacent shots, while directors crafting and improvising as they went along was now de-emphasized in favor of being a technician charged with getting shots done while sticking to a pre-approved plan. The ethos can be boiled down to the notion that the more prepared you are, the less things can go wrong. George Lucas, for instance, followed this model of pre-visualization by using what were called digiboards to not only plan blocking and camera angles, but also to fine-tune the timing and cuts, and even try rough sound effects. Ultimately, the economic method assembled films piece by piece, leaving no variables to chance.
Okay, just for some of our listeners out there who are less inclined to have in-depth knowledge about the inner workings of the making a movie,
yes.
Are there some themes behind the whole Dogma 95 that would be visible in like other forms of the arts or other forms of society?
Absolutely. The academic approach was actually a painting methodology that emerged in the 19th century, relying on fixed sequences leading up to a finished work. The subject of the painting had to be something already well known, which was then fleshed out in a series of sketches before the application of glazes and varnishes. In other words, this mirrored Ince's prioritization of control and deliberation. Subsequent Impressionist movements, on the other hand, ushered in an entirely new mode of operation. The artists actually painted in the field, taking real-time stock of certain characteristics of light and shadow impossible to notice when a subject was drawn from inside a studio. The essence of Dogma 95 drew inspiration from the immediacy and unstructured nature of Impressionism, while, like Jackson Pollock standing over instead of facing his canvas, the aim was to fully embed the director in the soul of his project and engage with the moment. An expression does not have the same value twice, nor does it live twice.
Okay, so just tying it back to the point you made earlier, so while the vow of chastity was followed, what were some of like the more on-set and day-to-day strategies of the directors in the making of the films?
Well, compared to the academic approach and its fostering of a work according to predetermined steps, and the coverage model of filmmaking, which relies on editing and reshooting from a single master tape, the Dogma directors wanted to capture what they called the instant above all else. If a second take was needed, honoring the instant meant deviating from what was actually already done in the hopes of sparking something new and true to this particular moment. Von Trier and Winterberg embraced going down unexpected paths as opposed to dreading them. This is along the lines of Nietzsche's claim that we confront each moment as something that was never before and never will be again, and that we meet squarely what is actually there right now in front of us. So this is best embodied in how Von Trier shot Breaking the Waves. He claimed actors were allowed to move within scenes as they pleased, and were encouraged to keep things fresh. They knew the basics of their characters, and the general point of the dialogue, but it was up to them to find their way on set. Camera work was never from the same vantage point, typically improvised, and actors didn't really know beforehand what time, or if they would even be in a shot. They just had to play the scene regardless. This meant that actors had to be switched on at all times, even if it wasn't their line. And so neither party was fully aware of the other's intentions, and it created a unique relationship and interplay. Obviously, a filmmaker wouldn't arrive on set completely devoid of ideas. It's still very important to feel one's way around rooms and vision characters occupying certain spaces, and foresee camera placements. The goal was for these considerations not to dominate one's thinking before and after, but to take shape as organic elements of the filming process.
Okay, I'm starting to get a better idea of what you're getting at now with the whole process and simplification. So, is there another example you could give me on how the making of a Dogma 95 film would look like, maybe from like the real world?
Yeah, of course. Harmony Korine's description of another Dogma film, Julie Donkey Boy, accurately demonstrates the spirit of the movement. We sat and watched the actors and listened to them for an hour or two. Sometimes it was 11 a.m. and we hadn't shot an inch, and then suddenly it would come. Let's go this way, or let's go that way. And then we'd shoot the scene in 15 minutes. So in lieu of constantly repeating and refining identical scenes, the Dogma movement wanted to avoid crushing the spirit of its actors and directors, and instead tried to unify them in a conscious, creative endeavor. In other words, intensifying experiences, defamiliarizing the familiar, and this is so often referenced seeking to re-enchant the filmmaking process.
Wow. Okay. I have to say, I've been very impressed with what you've been saying. Like, I really like some of the concepts you've been bringing forward from Dogma 95, and I will be sure to integrate some of these concepts into my next film, as I think some of the influences will support a very strong message. Thank you so much for being here, Anders.
My pleasure.
It was great speaking to you. And don't forget, listeners, Anders' book, Swedish-Danish Collaboration and Rivalry in Film, has hit the shelves, and I highly recommend it. It's a very good read. And thank you, everyone, for listening today. Like if you enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe and donate. Looking forward to next week and are looking to finish Melancholy. Good night, everyone.